My aunt changed the locks before my mother's funeral flowers were even dead. I found out because I drove to the house at 6 in the morning, still wearing the same black sweater I had slept in, and my key would not turn. At first I thought I was too tired to line it up properly. Then I saw the brass was new. The handle had been replaced overnight. When I knocked, my cousin Brent opened the door just wide enough to block the hallway with his body. He did not look sad. He looked annoyed. "You cannot just come in anymore," he said. "We are trying to get the estate organized." The estate. My mother had been dead for 48 hours. I stared at him for a second, then looked past his shoulder. The foyer table was gone. The framed mirror my grandfather had refinished himself was gone. 2 paintings had already come off the wall. Cardboard boxes sat open on the floor like they were in the middle of a clearance sale. "Where is Aunt Lydia?" I said. "Handling things," he said. "You should call before showing up." That was when I realized they had not changed the locks for security. They had changed them to control the story. My mother and I had lived in that house together for the last 4 years. I paid the utility bills, handled the medication schedule, drove her to every appointment, and slept on the den sofa the last 6 months because stairs had become too hard for her. But the moment she was gone, my aunt and her son moved like I had been temporary furniture. Brent started to close the door. I put my hand flat against it. "My bag is inside," I said. "My laptop is inside. My mother's documents are inside." He gave me a tight little smile that made me want to slap him. "Anything relevant to probate will be reviewed by the family." The family. I almost laughed, because that was always how they did it. They used family like a weapon whenever they wanted obedience, and like a locked gate whenever they wanted exclusion. I looked down and noticed something strange. Brent was wearing my mother's house keys on his own ring. Not all of them. Just one old silver key with a chipped blue cap that I had not seen in years, the basement archive key. He followed my eyes and instinctively turned the ring in his palm, hiding it. That one movement told me 2 things. First, they had already started going through places in the house they never cared about while my mother was alive. Second, they were looking for something specific. I stepped back from the door. "Fine," I said. "Then I want a written inventory of everything removed from the house." Brent smirked. "Talk to Lydia." Then he shut the door in my face. I stood on the porch for a full 10 seconds, staring at my reflection in the new brass lock. Most people would call a lawyer first. Most people did not spend 8 years as a records analyst for a title in a state research firm. I did. And when you spend that long learning how families bury ownership, hide intent, and weaponize paperwork, you stop hearing words first. You start hearing timing. And Lydia was moving too fast. That was the moment the grieving daughter in me took 1 step back and the records analyst took over. My aunt called me 3 hours later, right around the time I knew the funeral home would be finalizing the visitation schedule. Her voice was sugar over gravel. "Cora, sweetheart, I wish you had not made a scene this morning." "You changed the locks," I said. There was a small pause. "The house has to be protected. Your mother left everything very messy. My mother alphabetized insurance binders for fun. Messy was not a word anyone who knew her would ever use." I said nothing. Lydia kept going. "I know this is emotional for you, but your mother made it clear she wanted me to help manage things. It is better if Brent and I handle the estate logistics. You have been under so much stress. That was another thing people did when they wanted to remove you from your own life. They called it protecting you." "When is the will reading?" I said. "Soon," she said. "Our attorney is confirming." "Our attorney. Not the family attorney. Not your mother's attorney. Our attorney." Another timing mistake. Because my mother had not used Lydia for anything legal in the last decade. She had trusted only one estate lawyer, an older woman named Miriam Scott, who billed like she hated every unnecessary phone call on earth. Why would Lydia suddenly use someone else? Unless she wanted a room full of people who already knew which way to lean. I thanked her for the update in the calmest voice I could manage, hung up, and called Miriam directly. Her assistant answered. "Miss Scott is not handling the estate," she said. I looked at the phone in silence. "Did my mother move her file?" I asked. "Not through us." That was the second crack. Not just a crack. A seam. By noon, I was sitting in my car outside the county records office, drinking burnt coffee and trying to slow my pulse enough to think clearly. My aunt always had the same weakness. She believed being the loudest person in the room made her the smartest. She also believed grief made other people stupid. Sometimes it did, but grief also strips life down to essentials. And when you have nothing left to lose, details become sharp. I started with the house. The property was still in my mother's name alone. No recent transfer, no life estate deed, no joint tenancy filing, no new lien activity. Interesting. If Lydia had truly taken over lawfully, she would not need to move like a burglar in daylight. Then I pulled the basics on my late grandmother's estate because that was where this family always got weird. That search gave me my first real surprise. A dormant memorandum of trust had been indexed against the old lake parcel my grandparents sold years ago. Not active title, not exactly, but enough to show that sometime in the past a private family trust had held connected assets beyond the main house. I sat straighter in my seat. My mother had mentioned a trust only once and never by name. I had been 17 helping her box ornaments after Christmas when she told me never to trust the version of any family story told at a funeral. By the time people are crying in public, she had said half the paperwork has already been moved. At the time, I thought she was being cynical. Now I wondered if she had been leaving me a breadcrumb. I drove back to the house just before sunset, not to go in but to watch. Brent left around 7, carrying 2 banker boxes to his truck. Lydia came out 10 minutes later with a trash bag full of what looked like old files. She dropped it hard into the bin by the garage. People always tell on themselves when they think paper is safer destroyed than read. The moment they drove away, I walked to the trash enclosure, lifted the lid, and pulled the bag back out. Inside were magazines, expired coupons, 2 pharmacy receipts, and under them a bundle of file folders ripped in half. They had not even shredded them properly, just torn through them fast. I took the bag to my car and spread the pieces across the passenger seat. Most were useless. Old appliance warranties, church donation letters, a holiday card list. Then I found half of a legal cover sheet with my grandmother's name, the phrase Schedule C, and the tail end of a trust title, Marrow Point Family Trust. My breathing changed. Not faster, sharper, because now I knew Brent had not grabbed that basement archive key by accident. There was something in that house connected to a trust Lydia did not want me seeing. I could have gone to court right then for emergency access, but that would have warned them. And every good trap needs one thing more than rage. It needs patience. The visitation was the next evening. Lydia hugged mourners like she had personally invented grief. Brent stood near the guest book looking solemn in a navy suit that still had the sleeve tack stitching on it. He had bought funeral clothes for the performance. I stood near the memorial photos and watched people come in. My mother had chosen every frame in that display herself years earlier. She liked getting ahead of practical things. But one photo was missing. The one from the old lake cabin porch where she stood with my grandfather holding a metal cash box in her lap and laughing at someone off camera. Lydia knew exactly what she was removing. Memory is dangerous when it points toward evidence. Halfway through the evening, my mother's former nurse Evelyn touched my elbow. "Your aunt asked whether your mother ever mentioned a blue ledger," she said quietly. I kept my face still. "Did she say that to you directly?" Evelyn nodded. She seemed embarrassed. She said she was just trying to gather important estate paperwork. Blue ledger. Now the shape of the search was clearer. Not just general documents. Specific ones. My mother had kept a basement archive in the old furnace room. Insurance binders, tax copies, house repair invoices, cemetery records, every receipt from every meaningful year of her life. If a blue ledger existed, it would be there. Unless Lydia had already found it. Or unless my mother had moved it because she knew Lydia would look there first. I spent that night in a budget hotel 10 minutes from the house, turning over every conversation my mother and I had had in the last year. 3 weeks before she died, after one of the rougher chemo nights, she had made me promise something strange. If Lydia starts acting helpful too fast, do not argue with her. Just look where she never volunteered to clean. At the time, I thought the morphine had made her ramble. Now it sounded like instruction. The next morning was the will reading. Lydia had chosen a young probate attorney named Carson Vale, a man with perfect hair and the cautious smile of someone who billed in 6-minute increments and preferred clients with clean shoes and messy souls. The will he read was dated 6 years earlier. It left the house liquid accounts and personal property in equal shares to my mother and Lydia. Since my mother had died, Lydia argued that as surviving named beneficiary of the family structure and nearest administrative relative, she needed temporary control pending clarification of my mother's line. It sounded polished. It also smelled wrong. Because if my mother died owning her share outright, her estate interest should not evaporate into Lydia's hands by tone of voice alone. Carson kept using phrases like practical administration and family understanding instead of giving clean answers. Then Lydia deployed the real knife. Of course, she said, Cora can receive something reasonable once we settle debts, but she knows her mother wanted simplicity. Simplicity. That was rich coming from a woman who changed locks before thank you notes were ordered. I let my eyes fill slightly, just enough to make her think she was winning. Then I asked the question I already knew would make Carson uncomfortable. Has anyone filed a complete estate asset inventory yet? He blinked. Not formally. Then on what basis are you discussing distribution? I asked if no complete inventory exists, and no independent review of trust-related holdings has been produced. The room got very quiet. Lydia turned toward me slowly. Trust-related holdings. I gave her the mildest expression I could manage. Was that not something we should clarify? Carson cleared his throat. If there are any supplemental instruments, they would need to be produced. Need to be produced. Not do they exist. Not have you checked. Just floated into the room like a polite grenade. Lydia smiled without showing teeth. Your mother loved obscure paperwork, she said. We should not let that distract us from her wishes. That was not an answer. And everyone in the room knew it. After the meeting ended, I did something Lydia did not expect. I apologized. I touched her arm gently and said I was sorry if grief had made me difficult. I told her she was right that my mother often over-organized things. I even said maybe the trust clue was probably nothing old and irrelevant. Lydia relaxed so visibly it was almost insulting. That was the moment she stepped into the trap. People like Lydia do not become careless when they feel safe. They become careless when they think you have gone soft. By evening, she had texted me asking if I wanted to come by the house the next morning to gather a few personal things before they started preparing it for sale. For sale. There it was. Too fast. Again. No clean inventory. No settled estate posture. No trust clarification. And already a sale. Perfect. I texted back that I would appreciate that very much. Then I called the one person Lydia would never consider dangerous. Mr. Harlan Pike, the retired contractor who had handled repairs on the house and the old lake cabin for both my grandparents and my mother. He was 73, hard of hearing in one ear, and remembered buildings better than birthdays. When I asked whether he knew anything about a hidden file space, he said something that made me grip the phone tighter. Not hidden, he said. Your granddad called it the dry room. Behind the basement shelving. We sealed it after the flood year. Your mother kept records in there. Told me once if anyone ever tried to steal family history, that room would outlast their lies. The next morning, Lydia let me into the house with the kind of fake generosity that makes your skin crawl. Take whatever sentimental items you want from your old room, she said. We are trying to keep this civil. Civil. Boxes were stacked in the dining room, each marked by Brent in thick black marker. Kitchen. Linens. Art. Donate. Sell. He was sorting my mother's life like a reseller with a deadline. I walked slowly through the house, letting them think I was emotional, disoriented, defeated. Then I asked to use the basement bathroom. Lydia hesitated only a second too long before nodding. The basement smelled like detergent and old stone. The archive shelves had been half emptied. But when I moved the back row of paint cans aside, I found the seam Harlan described. A shallow panel almost invisible under the shelving track. Inside the dry room was a metal file case, a deed envelope, and a blue ledger. I almost laughed from relief. Not because I had found something, because I had found exactly what Lydia was afraid of. I tucked my phone between two boxes, switched to video, and began scanning pages as fast as I could. The ledger was not poetic. It was precise. Asset lists. Transfer notes. Insurance schedules. References to Marrow Point Family Trust. Distributions. One line item marked Lake Parcel Sale Proceeds redirected per amendment. Another marked Main House Maintenance Reserve for Cora through residency period. Then I opened the deed envelope. Inside was a notarized transfer on death deed, recorded but held in escrow copy form, leaving my mother's sole residential property interest, the house, directly to me, effective on her death contingent only upon a matching affidavit. Packet. My mother had bypassed the chaos entirely, unless someone buried the packet. I checked the file case. There it was. Affidavit draft. Attorney cover letter. Recording instructions. And one more document that made everything click into place. A signed trust amendment from 14 months earlier, removing Lydia as successor advisory trustee over the remaining reserve assets, and naming me instead if my mother predeceased final distribution. That was why Lydia was frantic. She was not just trying to steal the house. She was trying to outrun paperwork that cut her out. Footsteps sounded overhead. I slid the documents back, kept only photographed copies on my phone, and took the blue ledger with me under my coat. Not because I panicked, because now I needed bait. I came upstairs looking slightly flushed. Lydia noticed immediately. Did you find everything you needed? She asked. Almost, I said. There were so many old records downstairs I got overwhelmed. Her eyes sharpened. Old records. I nodded. Then I let my voice wobble just enough. I think I found one ledger thing, but honestly I could not make sense of it. Probably tax junk. Brent looked up from the dining table. What ledger? I shrugged. Blue one. I left it downstairs, I think. That was a lie. Lydia smiled too quickly. You do not need to stress over any of that, sweetheart. Brent and I can clear out the basement today. Perfect. I made myself hesitate. Would it help if I signed something saying I am not contesting the house prep? I know you want to get it listed. I just do not want anyone saying later that I caused delays. Brent practically leaned forward. Carson can draft a waiver, he said. There it was. Their own fake solution. I looked uncertain. Lydia placed a hand over mine like a saint in a family drama. We all want peace, she said. Peace is what dishonest people call speed when they are close to losing. By that afternoon, Carson emailed a simple occupancy and non-interference acknowledgement. It was intended to say I had voluntarily removed personal effects and would not obstruct preparation for sale. He wrote it sloppily because he thought the real fight had gone out of me. Buried in the second paragraph was language acknowledging that Lydia was acting only as temporary facilitator pending finalized authority documents. Pending finalized authority documents. Not owner. Not confirmed executor. Not sole beneficiary. I signed. Then I sent my own response, attaching a request that any sale disclosure package include all documents materially affecting title, trust claims, occupancy, history, and recorded transfer interests, so that no future buyer could claim an underproblement. Carson approved it without reading carefully enough, which meant I now had written confirmation that Lydia intended to market the property, while still under a duty to disclose any title affecting documents. The showing was scheduled 3 days later, for a private cash buyer. Lydia loved private buyers. Fewer witnesses. Unfortunately for her title, companies are witnesses with filing systems. The morning of the showing, I went to Miriam Scott with everything. She read in silence for almost 20 minutes, then took off her glasses, and said the only thing that mattered. Your mother did not leave this ambiguous. No, I said. Miriam tapped the trust amendment. Your aunt knows that. Yes, I said again. That was the best part. Not that I could beat Lydia. That Lydia already knew she should lose. By late afternoon, we were in the dining room of the house, Lydia, at one end of the table, Brent by the window, Carson with his polished briefcase, the buyer and title representative reviewing preliminary documents, and me in the chair. Lydia thought grief had broken. The title rep, a woman named Denise, frowned at her screen. We have an issue, she said. There appears to be a recorded transfer-related instrument package referenced in supplemental estate materials that was not included in the seller-side disclosure. Lydia went still. Carson turned. What package? Miriam slid copies across the table. The packet containing the transfer on death deed affidavit, materials residency, reserve references, and trust amendment, removing Miss Lydia Mercer from successor advisory authority, she said. Also the ledger documenting corresponding reserve administration. Brent actually made a sound, not a word, just a startled exhale like a tire losing air. Lydia looked at me. For one full second, the polite widow act disappeared and I saw the real thing underneath. Greed with lipstick. This is absurd, she said. Cora stole private documents. Miriam did not even blink. These documents concern title beneficiary status and trust administration tied directly to attempted sale disclosures. They are not optional. Denise from Title nodded slowly. If this packet is authentic, the proposed seller does not have clear authority to convey as represented. That was the line. The clean one. The line that killed the whole performance. Lydia started talking fast then. Too fast. About misunderstanding, about old drafts, about your mother, changed her mind all the time, about family confusion, about stress. But speed never beats paper, especially not signed paper. I opened the blue ledger and turned it to the page with the maintenance reserve note and distribution index. Then I slid over the page where my grandmother's trust notation referenced the Marrow Point Reserve and the later advisory amendment. You were looking for this before the flowers died, I said quietly. That is why you changed the locks. That is why Brent had the basement key. That is why you tried to sell the house before inventory. No one interrupted me, because now they could all see the shape of it. Not grief, a rush, a theft attempt wearing black clothes. Brent stared at his mother. You said there was no other paperwork. Lydia did not answer him. She was still staring at me. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Carson looked physically ill. Denise was already typing notes. The buyer stood up and said he was no longer interested in a property with unresolved authority conflict. Then Miriam delivered the final blow in her dry, merciless voice. We will also be requesting immediate accounting for any removed personal property, attempted disposal of records, and any representations made in anticipation of sale. If necessary, we can seek emergency court supervision by the end of the day. Lydia sank back in her chair. Not dramatically. Not like in movies. Worse. Like someone who had suddenly realized the room was no longer arranged around her. The meeting ended in pieces. The buyer left first. Denise took copies. Carson asked for time to review. Brent followed his mother out to the front walk, whispering fiercely enough that even through the window I could see blame turning on itself. I stayed seated. Miriam gathered her papers and gave me a sideways look. You knew she would rush a sale, she said. I nodded. You let her. I looked at the empty doorway, where Lydia had stood. People tell the truth fastest when they think the clock belongs to them, I said. Miriam almost smiled. 2 weeks later, the court recognized the transfer packet and the trust amendment, without much drama. There was no grand trial, no cinematic confession, no one falling to their knees. Reality is usually colder than that. Lydia had to return several items removed from the house. Brent avoided me entirely after sending one defensive text about not knowing everything, which was probably the closest he would ever come to admitting guilt. Carson withdrew from representing Lydia in any contested estate matter. The trash bag of torn records became its own ugly little footnote. As for the house, it passed to me exactly as my mother intended. The maintenance reserve was not enormous, but it was enough to stabilize repairs, settle loose ends, and keep the property from becoming the fire sale Lydia wanted. I moved back in 3 weeks later, not because I was clinging to grief, but because I was done letting other people rename my life as inconvenience. The strangest part was how quiet the house felt once the performance ended. No Lydia, clattering through drawers pretending to organize. No Brent stomping around like ownership was a mood. Just the old floorboards, the radiator hiss, and the archive shelves downstairs waiting to be sorted properly. On my first night back, I carried the blue ledger to the porch and sat with it in my lap thinking about that missing memorial photo from the visitation. My mother on the old lake cabin porch, laughing with a metal box in her hands like she already knew one day the right records would matter more than the right tears. She had known her sister. She had known the speed greed travels at after a death. And she had left me exactly what I needed, not just the house, but the map of how to keep it. That was the real inheritance. Not square footage. Not reserve funds. Not silverware in labeled drawers. Clarity. The kind that arrives only after someone tries to erase you and fails. Lydia called once after the court order, leaving a voicemail about family pain and misunderstandings and how your mother would have hated all this division. I deleted it without finishing the message. My mother did hate division. That was why she documented everything. Because people who truly want peace do not ask survivors to ignore paper. They make sure the paper protects them when peace fails. The following Sunday, I replaced the memorial photo Lydia had removed and set it back in the foyer where it belonged. Then I changed the locks. Not out of fear. Out of order. There is a difference. They thought grief would make me passive. They thought changing a lock, tearing a file, and speaking in soft probate language would be enough to turn my mother's house into their opportunity. What they forgot was that inheritance is not just about what someone leaves behind. It is about who understands the trail. And I have spent my whole adult life reading trails left by people who thought no one would follow them. Lydia moved first. That was her mistake. Because the faster she ran, the easier it became to see exactly what she was trying to outrun. She wanted the house. She wanted control. She wanted the story to become simple before the documents had a chance to speak. So I let her hurry. I let her draft the waiver. I let her push the showing. I let her arrange the table where she thought she would finalize the theft. Then I brought the missing pages back into the room. I did not scream. I did not beg. I did not tell anyone to trust me. I just gave them paper. And paper, when it is real, does not need emotion to win. By winter, I had restored the basement dry room, cataloged every archive shelf, and had the old porch photo reframed in walnut. The house still hurt sometimes. Grief does not vanish because a deed validates you. But the pain was cleaner now. No longer mixed with panic. No longer tangled with the feeling that my own life could be packed into boxes while I stood on the porch. That part was over. Lydia lost the house she tried to sell. Brent lost the easy future he thought he could inherit through momentum. And I lost the last illusion that blood automatically means loyalty. Fair trade. In the end, my aunt was right about one thing. The estate did need to be organized. She just never imagined I would be the one doing it.